The radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Yaron Brook Show on this Tuesday night. I think it's Tuesday. Sad Tuesday night. Another sad night in America. I typically don't watch news, but there's very little value of watching television news in normal times and almost any other time. But during times of demonstrations, pictures, are very meaningful to see what's actually happening on the ground versus reading it. Actually provides a lot more information. So yesterday and a little bit today, I've been watching the news reports coming in from cities all over the United States, from New York to Los Angeles and everything in between. Of course, Washington D.C. this morning, and all across the country. Quite striking and very, very depressing pictures, events all over this country. And it's striking, particularly because it's a time when nobody's going to work. It's a time where over 30 million Americans unemployed. It's a time of economic shrinkage and economic collapse, really, at least short-term collapse. Massive wealth destruction, all caused by the government's response, by the coronavirus, and, of course, primarily by the government's response to the coronavirus. We're seeing, massive economic stress to the system. And now, we are seeing cities, or at least vast segments of cities, shut down, not because of the coronavirus. Indeed, it seems like fear of the coronavirus out the window as people gather in masses around the country, around these cities in demonstrations. We're seeing it shut down from these demonstrations, from shutting down the highways, the streets, people boarding up their stores that they were just getting ready to open, stores that are just being permitted to open. Permitted, there's another word, the government permitted businesses to go back to work. And people are finally opening up stores now. They're boarding them up. And store owners going out there to try to defend their property. I saw a picture in L.A. of store owners trying to defend their property, arrested by the police under the assumption that they were the looters, not the store owners. Just picture after picture all over the place, depressing and sad occurrences in this country. And the people who are going to benefit from it, the people who are going to benefit from everything, really from the response to coronavirus, and now from these demonstrations and the response to demonstrations, and if we deploy the military even more so, the people who are going to benefit from this, the people who are going to win from this are the barbarians within America, and the barbarians from out America. There is no question that left, right, the barbarians on both sides are sitting on the sidelines and eating this up. This is fantastic for their cause, on either side of the argument. If you're on the left, you're seeing hundreds of thousands of people all over the country rallying around a cause that you can leverage into political ammunition. You're seeing businesses slammed, and you're seeing at the same time corporate America come on your side. We'll talk about that, the number of corporations that have declared themselves on the side of Black Lives Matter. You're seeing Americans generally sympathetic to the cause of Black Lives Matter. I think most Americans don't know what that cause is, but it sounds good in the context of what is going on right now. And then on the sidelines also, so the left is in a sense, this is a gift that was handed to them in terms of their political influence, in terms of giving credibility to some of the craziest ideas in terms of rallying hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of people to their cause, and not the cause of a moderate left, the cause of an extreme left, the cause of a wacky left. And then there are people on the right sitting on the sidelines and saying, you know, this is brilliant. This has the potential, although I don't actually think now that he can take advantage of it. This is the potential of swinging the electorate. As the silent majority of Americans sit at home and watch all this, they're going to be disgusted by the looting, by the demonstrations, by the shutting down of life, by everything that's going on, and by the Black Lives Matter. And they're going to rally behind Trump or behind a Republican cause. They're going to rally behind maybe a nationalist cause, behind a law and order cause, behind a more authoritarian cause. So I'm sure, while they won't ever admit it, the nationalist conservatives, the various new right groups from alt-right to the national conservative movement to Trump supporters, in a sense, viewing this as an opportunity to differentiate themselves from the left. You know, let the left go out there and rampage the cities. Americans will come around and Americans will vote for them against Antifa, against these protesters, for the sake of law and order, for the sake of American greatness, for the sake of, and with all that will come more authoritarian measures, more central planning, more control, more power to the presidency. If anything, we're seeing right now is many Americans are thinking, why isn't the president doing more? Why isn't the president more active? These are Republicans that typically are pro-federalism, but now, to hell with federalism. Federalism seems not to be working. So let us embrace the power of the federal government. Let us co-opt state governments and impose order from above. That is what many Republicans are thinking, even though they're not quite yet ready to say it. But that is going to be the shape of the next election. The shape of the next election is going to be centered around these events and around how you interpret these events. And on both sides, what you have is statist, authoritarian solutions to the problems, to the real problems that we face. Right. So it really is barbarians all over the place, whether it's Antifa, and Antifa's there, but I don't think Antifa is a major force. There's organized criminals, all kinds. There are anarchists of various types. There are just people who are in the emotion of the moment, see a smashed window, why not go in? Or they see a rock and why not throw it? Some organization, some not. It's mayhem. It's chaos, exploited by the worst elements. It's always the case that chaos is exploited by the worst elements. And this will be exploited by the worst elements of the left, as it is right now, and ultimately be exploited by the worst elements of the right. And one of the great tragedies coming out of this is that the Black Lives Matter, organization, entity, is gaining massive credibility, much more than it had in 2015, 2016, when they were founded and when there were demonstrations at the time. This is much bigger. And they are gaining far greater support. And who is these Black Lives Matter? Now, it started out as I think, a just cause about police brutality, and about police brutality particularly against blacks. Police brutality, police discrimination against blacks, and there's plenty of empirical evidence. And I know there's counter evidence, but it seems to me that the weight of evidence is with those who say, yes, this is a real problem. More blacks are stopped for routine, car, automobile stuff. So not in violent neighborhoods, not where there is cause, a legitimate cause. Just if a white person or a black person is speeding or doesn't have their taillights or doesn't have something wrong with the car or has something wrong with the car, the stats show that it's much more likely that Hispanic or black will be stopped. It's much more likely that that stop will become problematic. We've seen video of just horrific things. Now, it's true, police brutality is often targeted at whites as well. And Black Lives Matter had the opportunity, I think it's the beginning, to stake out a claim against police brutality. And maybe make the more general point. The more general point that the police brutality is primarily targeted at blacks, but they could have made the broader point about police brutality and reform in the police forces and changes to police routines. And they did not. They did not. Instead, they chose to embrace every item within a radical, nutty leftist agenda and pick that up, and primarily, more than anything else. Not only did they choose to focus only on police misconduct against blacks, but they combined that with a leftist worldview. They combine it with an attitude towards hatred of capitalism, a hatred of everything that is America, a hatred of America itself, its institutions. Now, it's true, those institutions have been bad for blacks for much of American history, but instead of embracing the good within those institutions, the fact that those institutions have within them the ability to correct themselves, to fix themselves, they embraced the idea of destruction, of complete annihilation of those institutions and their replacement. They've embraced the most radical, crazy, nutty, left-wing agenda possible. All couched as, oh, no, we're just here sometimes to demonstrate police brutality, to demonstrate discrimination against blacks within the police. And unfortunately, more and more people are caught up in this. More and more people support them. The amount of money that flows in their direction flows from all kinds of sources. I know there's a big thing to attribute everything that the left does to George Soros, but the left has many resources, George Soros being just one of many. For example, over the last few days, Black Lives Matter has gained support from Twitter, which is using in its corporate description the Black Lives Matter hashtag. From Warner Brothers brands, including HBO, Turner Broadcasting, TBS, HBO Max, who've all changed their Twitter names to Black Lives Matter. The hashtag has appeared in posts from retailers like Nordstrom, Ben & Jerry's, media companies like TikTok. Of course, TikTok is a Chinese company, so they're loving this, right? We'll talk about Barbarians outside of America and how much they're enjoying what's going on right now. I don't see any comments blocked, so I'm not sure whose comments are blocked. I just see in the chat. So we're seeing this anti-capitalist organization that embraces the destruction of businesses, embraces. I remember the first time I really encountered Black Lives Matter in any significant way, and I did a whole show about them, was during, I think it was 2016, and they were demonstrating in Chicago, and they weren't demonstrating in front of City Hall. They weren't demonstrating in front of the police headquarters. They were demonstrating a police shooting, against a police shooting. No, they were demonstrating on the $1 Million Mile. They were blocking the ability of people to go into stores. They were demonstrating with signs that were anti-capitalist. They were demonstrating capitalism. They were demonstrating against the ability of people to engage in peaceful exchange, in trade. The fact that somebody died provided them with an excuse to go and demonstrate about all the issues in the world that, that go under their leftist agenda. And now they're being embraced by everybody. They're being embraced by company after company. The whole newspaper, stories about how, Citibank and other, companies all over the place are embracing Black Lives Matter without looking into the extent to which they're anti-capitalist, the extent to which they embrace identity politics, the extent to which they embrace intersectionality and everything that intersectionality involves, the fact that they embrace egalitarianism, the fact that they, are anti-American in foreign policy in almost every dimension, and the fact that at heart they were anti-American at its founding, in terms of the founding ideas of America. So this is a field day for Black Lives Matter and everybody who supports it. This is a field day for the left. And if Donald Trump actually puts the troops in the streets, actually brings troops into the streets, that'll only strengthen the left. That'll only strengthen their views. That'll only make them more extreme, more radical, more committed to the anti-capitalist, anti-American ideas. But of course, bringing troops into the streets would rally the barbarians on the right. The ones who reject the idea that there is such a thing as police brutality. They will always defend police no matter what they do. That have no problem with the fact that police discriminate against blacks. And that can't wait to see the federal government assert itself by putting troops on the ground. Savanda, I don't know what comment they blocked. I didn't block anything, and I don't see anything being blocked, so I'm not sure where the blockage is happening. Hopefully it'll be fixed, and thanks to the support. Raya asks, why is it wrong for BLM, Black Lives Matter, to highlight the specific problems of police brutality against blacks, but okay for people to discuss Islamic totalitarianism instead of the broader problem of totalitarianism? Well, because, again, I'm not saying that it's wrong of Black Lives Matter to highlight the specific problems of police brutality as long as they place it within the context of police brutality. And as long as that is their agenda item. But if they are placing it in the context of, if they are, arguing against or highlighting the idea of police brutality against blacks, and at the same time picking up an agenda which is authoritarian, which is anti-everything American stands for, which is not just focused on that, but focused on a much broader political, social, economic agenda. That is what I reject. But even when it comes to, this idea of focusing on brutality against blacks, you really have to be convinced that that is indeed what is happening. Did this policeman in Minneapolis kill this black man because he was black? Do we have solid evidence that that is the case? Or is he just an incompetent policeman who would have done this to anybody? And I don't know the answer to this. All the people that he has harassed in his past, because he has a file, right? This guy has a file. And it's shocking that he's still in a police uniform, or was still in a police uniform. Are all the things that he's ever been accused of doing badly related to the fact to minorities? I don't know the answer to that. But nobody cares. Because it's a black man, it's immediately an issue of racism. Now, they're using this to highlight that there is racism out there, and I get that there is. I get that there is. But is it as big of a problem as they indicate that it is? Versus just the idea that police are badly trained, that bad people are allowed to become policemen and allowed to stay as policemen, and that not only are they, some of them, many of them maybe bigoted, but they're also just not good policemen. Instead of highlighting the importance of what police do, what we see today, I see Black Lives Matter, people on television saying, what we need to do is defund the police. What we need is to start over. Really? You want to defund the police? The police are not important? Somebody asked this woman, Black Lives Matter woman, well, what about the looters? And she said, the real looters are the police. They're the ones that have necessitated the looting by what they do. And they should just be abolished, in a sense. They should be defunded. We should start by completely stop. Really? It's not serious. So they're not seriously interested, and this is my biggest problem with these demonstrations, is there's no agenda there to solve the problem. You need a real solution. What are we going to do? So on my program yesterday with Amy, she proposed getting rid of legal immunity. Okay, one thing we can do. I mean, the standards for who gets to be a policeman should be raised, okay? And maybe salaries need to be raised at the same time. Maybe state and local government should stop spending money on things that government should not spend money on, and instead focus the money more on police. Because maybe they hire bad apples because nobody else wants to be a policeman. I don't know. So maybe we need to dedicate more resources to paying police better salaries so we can hire better people. But the functioning of police is a crucial function in our society. And it's a very, very difficult one. What about advocating for getting rid of victimless crimes? I mean, if you got rid of the drug war and the war on immigrants, then you probably have too much police resources for all the rest of the crime. I mean, if you got rid of those two wars, so-called wars, the war on drugs and the war on immigrants, then you have plenty of police to keep the peace. And indeed, I'll repeat this again because I know that nobody wants to hear this, nobody believes it. Crime, primarily violent crime, is massively declined over the last 25 years. And if you got rid of the drug war, then violent crime would plummet. We would truly live in a safe society. We wouldn't need many more police. If you got rid of the drug war, then the gangs wouldn't have any reason for their existence. They would break up. They would have no revenue source. Their revenues come from drugs, nothing else. Many people who are today in jail would be released, and you'd have a lot fewer people incarcerated. And then you could be more selective, much more selective in terms of who you hire as a policeman. And then, of course, the police who you hire would not be corrupted by victimless crimes like immigration and like drugs. Police would stop chasing people who are not actually criminals by the definition of violating other people's rights. Police would then go back, maybe, to the old notion of the rule of law, objective law. A law focused on the protection of rights, not a law focused on preventing behavior that you don't like. Yeah, I mean, I would legalize prostitution as well, but you don't, you're not seeing the levels of corruption, the level of intensity, the level of violence surrounding prostitution as you do around drugs. I mean, there's nothing more destructive to both the police force and I think our culture, particularly in certain neighborhoods, than the drug war. And it's not that the consumers of the drugs live in those neighborhoods where drugs are traded and drugs are sold. The consumers often live in the nice part of town. You're not going to solve these problems of police brutality, of the kind of people the police hires, of the funding for the police. You're not going to solve them by following the agenda of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is not interested in true reform. They're not advocating true reform. They're not presenting actual ideas for what to do. So I would never march with them in the street because I would be marching for a Marxist, socialist, anti-capitalist, authoritarian agenda. I would not march with them in the street because there's no positive view that they articulate. There's no solutions that they present. I mean, to me, ending the drug war, increasing, getting rid of the police immunity, and increasing police training, and increasing the qualifications that police would require to become a policeman should be at the top of any list of demands. But that's not what they're demanding. That's not what they're requesting. That's not what you find if you look at their website. They're all about social justice. Social justice, which involves basically the disintegration of the United States of America in terms of its essential characteristics and what made it great and its essential institutions. So, when I see hundreds of thousands of people marching out there, and you should see the pictures from Houston, I mean, tens of thousands of people, there's something that I appreciate, the fact that they're marching against injustice. And I think it's legitimate in the world in which we live to march against injustice. I've said yesterday my objections to demonstrations, period. But given that we have demonstrations, the fact that people are offended by the injustice of how this guy was killed in Minnesota, I mean, it's good to see people taking that seriously. It is bad, it is horrific that people are using this for broader anti-American political agenda. And again, the same thing is happening on the right. And to see that, all you have to do is go look at my chat right now, and you can see the racists out. The racists are out. There we go. And too much of the right today is indeed motivated by racism, is indeed motivated by some form and some variation of white nationalism, even if they won't say it, even if they won't admit it, even if they won't talk about it in polite company. But that is the undertone throughout. It's the undertone through much of the immigration debate, but it's the undertone to much of the law and order debate as well. And again, instead of offering real solutions, real police reform, instead of acknowledging that there are problems and how to solve those problems, instead of acknowledging that there are real issues, no, they pretend that everything is fine if only you left white people alone. All the problems in the world come from people who look differently than them. And if only you united around and make America great again nationalism, that would solve all our problems. So, again, we're seeing barbarians from within. Right now you see, visually, the barbarians of the left, the looters, the destroyers, but also the demonstrators who are not just demonstrating out of a sense of injustice, but out of a sense of social justice, the anti-capitalist, anti-American viewpoint. It's a mixture, and it's really hard to separate them out. And it's sad. Vonda said, and it's true, the reason there's so many people in Houston is because he was born in Houston. You know, I think his daughter lives in Houston. His mother lives in Houston. This is a tragedy that's symbolic for the black community of racism against them that is indeed, I think, still pervasive in this country. And until we're willing to admit it, you can't deal with it. You can't handle it. You can't do anything about it. Now, on top of that, as I said yesterday and the day before, there are those who are taking advantage of this situation to throw bricks, to organize, to disrupt, to break, to destroy, to express themselves as anarchists will. Anarchists of the left, anarchists of the right, but just leftists who hate capitalism. So what's the big deal about destroying private property? Leftists who hate capitalism. So what's the big deal about destroying a store or stealing goods? Capitalism is evil to begin with. This is just an act of justice. I mean, one of the things that shocked me is somebody asked me yesterday or the day before about, well, what's the difference between this and the Tea Party? And I gave an answer. I think it was the right answer. And yesterday, I read this article in the Atlantic magazine. It's called The Double Standard of the American Riot. And what is she doing? Sorry, I read one of the comments in the chat that made me laugh. I mean, man, they're going nuts over there. What Kelly Carter Jackson, who wrote this article, is doing is she's equivocating between the American Revolution and what's going on in the streets of America right now. She is equivocating between the fight for liberty and the fight for freedom with the goal of establishing a just, moral society. With what is happening right now. And she's not just talking about the demonstrations. She's talking about the riots. This whole article is an attempt to legitimize the riots. She says if violence is a political language, white Americans are native speakers. Whites have everything they've attained, she says, in America is through violence. Certainly America itself is a product of violence. So why can't blacks destroy stores? Because it's the only thing that people will pay attention to. Rioting is a way to gain the attention of the people. Rioting is a statement. Rioting is the only way to change the world, she says. She writes, violence compels a response. Usually violence, by the way. Violence disrupts the status quo and the possibility of returning to business as usual. So often the watershed moments of the historical record are stamped by violence. It is the engine that propels society along from funerals to fury and from moments to movements. Very well written. But note the glorification of violence. Note the desire for violence. Note the necessity for violence. This is insanity. The Founding Fathers resisted violence for a long time, negotiated with the British, tried to reason with them, and for a long time had no interest in active revolt. And then when they did revolt, when they did use violence, they did it for a positive cause. They did it with a clear agenda. They wrote a Declaration of Independence in order to, in a sense, declaring war, declaring independence, declaring a revolution. What have Black Lives Matter actually declared? What has Black Lives Matter actually declared? almost nothing. And to the extent that they want something, it is not some positive value. It is the destruction of everything that is positive about America. It is a rejection of that Declaration of Independence. It's a rejection of the American form of government. It's a rejection of everything that has made us anything positive that this country has become. If they had a clear agenda on how to solve the real problems of racism in this country, instead of an agenda that is bound to exacerbate the problems of racism in this country, then one could be sympathetic. If they were advocating against police brutality against blacks, and here was an agenda on how to solve the issue and how to solve problems related to racism across the board, then great. I would be supportive of their movement. But that's not what they're advocating for. They're advocating for solving racism by being racist. They're arguing for solving racism by destroying the one country or the institutions of government that have the potential to actually get rid of racism in this country, which are the ideas of the founders. She continues to write in this article, again, think of the celebration of violence she is articulating here. Many people are asking if violence is a valid means of producing social change. The hard and historical answer is yes. Riots have a way of magnifying not merely the flaws in the system, but also the strength of those in power. Yeah, it has, she's right, it magnifies the strength of those in power. Does she really want to magnify the strength of those in power right now? Is that really what she wants to do? The American Revolution was won with violence. Yeah, but what was the cause? The French Revolution was won with violence. Yeah, but was that a good cause? Was that good? Was the outcome very positive? You got Napoleon at the end of that. That was the result. The Haitian Revolution was won with violence. And what did that do for the Haitians? And how well are the Haitians doing as a result of that violent revolution? Indeed, the Cuban Revolution, she doesn't say this, was won with violence. And how did that work out for the Cubans? I mean, you could go on and on. And then she says the Civil War was won with violence. Yeah. But the Civil War was won with violence to preserve the Declaration of Independence, not to unearth it, to preserve the American experiment, not to destroy it. And indeed, so half the revolution she cites are good, half of the acts of violence are good, half are not so good. But this is a celebration of violence. A revolution in today's terms, she writes, would mean that these nationwide rebellions lead to black people being able to access and exercise the fullness of their freedom and humility. And for that, they're going to destroy stores. For that, you're going to loot. For that, you're going to beat up people. How are you going to gain freedom and humanity? By causing damage to the innocent. By destroying the system of government that provides freedom. Again, if there was a statement of revolution for establishing a better America where racism did not exist, okay, I'd like to see that. But this is violence for the sake of violence. Rioting for the sake of rioting. Out of sure a sense of injustice. But taking it out on whom? There are bad apples in every police department in this country, probably. You take it out on all police. You take it out on everybody. You take it out on store owners. You take it out on the system of capitalism, which makes this country prosperous and able, hopefully, to survive all this. A riot may be, she writes, a riot may be temporary violence, quick and dirty, but it could become a revolution. And though slow and long-lasting, when it is truly mature, a revolution is irrefutable change. What revolution? To what end? To what end? Is a revolution going to be gained by beating up store owners, business owners? What are you trying to achieve? Articulate what you're trying to achieve. Because if I go to the Black Lives Matter website, that is a revolution that's anti-American. That's a revolution that goes against the ideas that would make racism go away. That is a revolution that will institutionalize racism forever in America if we followed the Black Lives Matter prescriptions. Let's say, okay, I'm just looking for questions that are relevant. Doesn't the black community have to start reforming themselves for their own thuggish and barbaric culture instead of only blaming external racism? Yeah, they certainly have to start reforming themselves. But that is true of American society broadly. And American society has to give them the space to do that. Now, I forgot another war. The war on poverty has destroyed the black community. Welfare has destroyed the black community. And the war on drugs has destroyed the black community. So before we tell them to reform, let's take away the barriers. Whether it's licensing laws, minimum wage laws, welfare, and the war on poverty are all means by which we've institutionalized too many people within the black community into poverty and isolated them into an unhealthy culture. But yes, there's no question that the culture among poor in this country has to change. And by the way, it's not unique to the black community. If you look at poor anywhere in this country that are institutionalized into poverty, that are poverty from generation to generation, it's not just blacks. There are many areas in which it is whites. It's unhealthy. It's destructive. It's barbaric. So it's not about blacks or whites. It's about getting rid of the barriers for people to be mobile, getting rid of the barriers for people to be successful. Maybe the biggest barrier in these neighborhoods is education. We provide a disgustingly horrific product. We provide products that human beings should not have to endure. Schools, so-called schools, that human beings should not have to endure. We destroy their capacity to be ambitious and productive by forcing them into these schools. So, we as a culture have to, we as a society, as a government, we have to think about the ways in which we can make it possible for these subcultures within our culture to be healthy. And we are preventing them from being healthy by giving them all the wrong message. A system of education that has now for generations taught multiculturalism, taught that reason doesn't matter, taught that science is an issue of race, science is an issue of ethnic origins, science is an issue of male oppression. Well, you can't reform a subculture when your culture is rotten to the core. And our culture, our American culture, has been rotten to the core because of our educational institutions. We teach the things that prevent social mobility. That relates to another question that was asked. We teach all that which prevents cultural improvement. We don't expect people to improve. We don't demand people improve. We don't have expectations. We don't believe that some cultures are better than other cultures. All are the same. Until we reject egalitarianism in every aspect of our lives, then you will continue to have subcultures that are poor, thuggish, barbaric. We need to embrace civilization. And civilization is primarily two ideas that both the right and the left reject. And the left has rejected it for now decades, and the right is now embracing the same ideas. The two ideas that are rejected are reason, the efficacy of reason, the importance of reason, the centrality of reason, reason as man's basic means of survival, reason as man's only source of knowledge. That is rejected by academia. It's rejected by the racists of the left and the racists of the right. It's rejected through and through. And then individualism. Individualism is rejected by the collectivists of the left, the collectivists of the right. It's rejected by the culture. And until you embrace a culture of reason and individualism, until you celebrate reason and individualism, until you celebrate, as Ayn Rand wrote in Apollo and Dionysus, until you celebrate Apollo, until you celebrate reason and science and technology and progress, you stop hating on technologists, you stop hating progress, as people on the left and on the right are doing these days. You can't hope to fix the culture, to fix poverty, to fix these subcultures that are so destructive. The only way to fix them is to embrace positive values. But the positive values are ones that are today in America rejected by left and right. And it's lone voices like me, attacked by the racists of the right here on my chat, who are trying to remind America about what America really stands for. It doesn't stand for blacks versus whites, this group versus that group. It stands for the sanctity of the individual. It stands for the sanctity of the human mind. It stands for progress, technology, science, capitalism, freedom, individual rights, achievement, individual achievement. Reason and individualism. When you can stand on the barricades, when you can march, you want a revolution. That's a slogan for a revolution. That's what the founding fathers fought for. Reason and individualism. That is what the Enlightenment was about. And yes, in order for the black community to start reforming itself, it needs more reason and individualism. But who's going to teach them that? Not the teachers in the schools, not the professors at the universities, not the President of the United States, this or any other one. But this one particularly not. And not the new right, which is dedicated to religion, collectivism, statism, nationalism, emotionalism. So who is going to teach? Who is going to help all Americans improve? Who is going to bring civilization back to this country? Does America's history of racism give justification for our minorities to be racially tribal? No, no, no. The history of racism in America, and it's an awful, horrific, black, dark history. That history is justification to reject racism in all its forms. To reject identity politics in all its forms. To reject the idea of race. To reject the prominence of race. The collectivism of race. To embrace that history should focus us on embracing the ideas, the only ideas that can lead them out of racism, which is individualism and reason. And the two are related, by the way, because reason is a faculty of the individual. Nobody can reason for you. So the only way out of this is to reject tribalism of all forms. Not to be an anti-tribal tribalist, which seemingly everybody is today. Again, on left and right. So no, it's absolutely inappropriate for minorities or anybody else to be racially tribal in an effort to somehow do away with racism. The very idea of racial tribalism is racist. What's the connection between emotionalism and tribalism? I've talked about this before, but if you are rejecting reason and you have embraced emotion, then you are lost. You don't know what the truth is. You don't know what to do. You don't know which direction to head. There's no source of truth for you. Your emotions are not good guides. You're just stumbling around in the dark. So what do you gravitate towards? Well, you gravitate towards somebody helping you decide what's true and what's not. Somebody helping you, somebody who understands the way you feel, your particular emotions. And those are typically people who look like you, who have similar experiences to you. Your tribe. And then the tribe makes you feel less afraid. It gives you guidance in terms of what you can do and what you can't do, and it gives you traditions or patterns of behavior. And of course, the tribe almost always needs a leader. And that tribe is going to be some authoritarian. So, emotionalism necessitates, you need an alternative to reason. Emotions can't be it. I mean, emotions, your own emotions can be it. What you need then is to be told what to do. Somebody has to tell you what to do. I mean, that's always the case. Emotionalism always leads to authoritarianism. And then the question is, who should tell you what to do? How do you connect with that person emotionally? Because that's all you've got, right? Emotions. Well, you look for somebody similar to you. Now, the Marxists would say similar to you means class. Similar to you doesn't mean race. Similar to you means class. It means, the proletarian all think the same. So that's the tribe. The tribe is the proletarian, right? And the bourgeois all think the same. They're the enemy. They're the bad tribe. Well, our tribe versus their tribe. But it's all tribalist. And it's all a rejection of individualism and reason. Every form of authoritarianism and tribalism is a rejection of reason and individualism. Certainly religion is a rejection of individualism and reason. Somebody says they support any country who wants to protect its borders. So I assume that means you support China wanting to protect its borders against, I guess, India right now. They've got nuclear weapons pointing at one another. You support North Korea because it wants to defend its borders against South Korea. You want to defend borders for the sake of borders? Really? That's the standard by which you defend particular countries? I don't. The most common form of racism now are white guilt and minority resentment. When white supremacy was the norm, Democrats benefit, nothing new. I think the most common forms of racism are now white guilt. White guilt is something white people feel. So, there's a sense in which that's racist, absolutely. But yeah, racism is prevalent all over the place. And it's in the form of whites mistreating other people of other colors, of other ethnic groups, and it's in the form of whites mistreating themselves, and it's in the form of minority groups mistreating whites and imposing on them or trying to impose on them white guilt. It goes in all directions all the time, and it has nothing to do with Democrats. What the hell? How is this political? It's bizarre, right? That you guys turn everything into left or right, political. Everything's political. There's racism on the left, there's racism on the right, there's racism in between, there's racism of all kinds. Let's see, was some other question related to this. What, in your opinion, on the extent and danger of anti-white racism in the culture right now? I don't differentiate between anti-this racism and anti-that racism. I think the danger is racism. There's a massive amount of racism. And I've often said, what has preserved racism more than anything else over the last, since the civil rights movement, have been the academics advocating for identity politics. It's the left that has preserved racism in this country and has emboldened white supremacists to come out of the holes that they've been hiding in for the last 50 years. So they've always been white racists. But for the last, for the period after the civil rights movement, they were embarrassed and ashamed and, in a sense, hid themselves for the most part. Now, again, give a white racist a police badge and all that, and he'll abuse the power you give him, and that happens. But for the most part, the white racism has been, everybody's tried to hide it. And what has risen is racism from the other side. It's identity politics. It's, intersectionality. It's the idea that if you're white, you're an oppressor automatically, and you should feel guilty, and you're a bad human being by very fact that you're white, and you should feel guilty, and you should bow down. You should do everything you can to compensate those that supposedly your skin color oppresses every single day. So it's the identity politics crowd on the left that has emboldened racism within minority communities and inflicted on it, in a sense, through this idea of white guilt, through this idea of you should be. But in a sense, what they've done is they maintained racial identity as a thing. They have celebrated racial identity as the essence of who you are. Your identity is your race. And that the left has done. And what has happened, I think, over the last 5-6 years in particular, with the rise of the alt-right, with the election of Donald Trump and the emboldenment of the racists of the right. So what many people on the right are saying is, hey, we can play this game. We can play this game. You want to see racism? We can do racism. And what you're seeing today is a country that I think is filled with racism from all directions. And this is related to the tribalism. Tribalism is just connected to that. But it's filled with racism, whether it's in the form of white guilt, whether it's in the form of people apologizing for their success, whether it's in the form of people hating people because of their skin color, whether it's blacks hating whites or whites hating blacks or Hispanics hating whites or whites hating Hispanics or whites hating immigrants, or all of that is motivated to a large extent by racism. And then people are now self-identifying themselves primarily as through their race. So the identity politics of the left is one. It's one across the board. And this is the destruction of reason individualism. This is the negation of individualism for the sake of the tribe, for the sake of the group. And you can define your group in a lot of different ways, but certainly one, the most primitive of them all, the most barbaric of them all, is to define it by reference to race, the original tribe. And again, it pervades this country. The constant talking about colors, people's skins. Who the F cares? But that's all that is talked about. So it's truly, truly disheartening. And as I've said before, as I've said many times, I believe the real danger to this country in the end result comes from the right, comes from the M2, the misintegrators, not for the disintegrated left. But the left sets it up for them. The left creates the chaos. The left creates the angst the left creates the nationalist, white supremacist right that I think will ultimately be victorious. That is scary. Let's see, there was another question related to this. If you are against Trump sending the troops while governors willfully refuse to have cops and National Guard stop the rioters, then what exactly do you suggest be done? I suggest that governors and city mayors and police chiefs get their act together and do the right thing. I suggest that we acknowledge that this country is a federation of states. And if governors don't do their job, let them suffer the wrath of the people in the ballot box. That's how we function in this country. If mayors do a bad job, let the voters vote them out. Let people locally protest against this. This is not a national problem. This is not a federal problem. And this is not something where one should ever use the military. As I've said before, the military is not trained for, civil unrest. It's not what they do. They're trained to kill the enemy. And I know many of you think these are just enemies, might as well just mow them down. But they have rights. And this is a police action. And they need to be dealt with in the way that police deals with crime, not in the way the military deals with enemies. And the police need to get much more aggressive, and the National Reserve needs to get much more aggressive and actually stop the criminals, stop the crimes. Focus on that. And if they don't, then that's another sign of the deterioration in this country, the sign of the state of the world in which we live. But, what does a general know about pacifying a civilian population in a way that is consistent with rights? It's not what you do when you're in enemy territory, or not what you should do anyway. All right, we're getting a ton of Super Chat questions, so you're going to have to slow down a little bit so that I can do this. Do you think Derek Chauvin should be charged with first-degree murder? What about the other officers who were complicit? Should they be charged as accessories to first-degree murder? I don't think, I am not a legal expert. I don't think they can win a charge for first-degree murder. First-degree murder implies intent. I don't think he intended to kill the person. I think this was massive criminal negligence, and I think it's probably second or third-degree murder. I do not think this is third-degree murder, and I do think the other officers should be tried for lesser crimes, but for something, right? They shouldn't be able to get off scot-free. So I think this is probably third-degree murder, which is what he's being charged with. It completely makes sense and is consistent. Somebody says, I've disagreed with you on Trump, but you made a lot of calming sense tonight. Thank you. There is hope. I don't know where you get hope from what I said. Maybe there's hope you'll disagree with me, but I don't know that there's hope for the country. I wanted to say one more thing about barbarians at the gate, and this relates to Trump foreign policy. There are people outside this country salivating over what's going on in this country. There are people really enjoying what is going on in this country. And those people are really implicitly the enemies of this country, even if explicitly they're not, maybe. They're people who Trump has embraced. They're countries that Trump has celebrated, encouraged. I mean, 2 of the 4, right? And yet, our enemies today, our enemies tonight, are loving this. I point out 4 countries. All have their own institutional media. And their media is filling their TVs with pictures and commentary about the decline of America. And they're using, all four countries are using the opportunity. They're using the opportunity to make a real push in terms of against American interests in various parts of the world. The four countries are Iran, Russia, Turkey, and China. The barbarians at the gate. Iran loves this. Iran, which Trump has dealt with kid gloves. Iran, which has threatened the United States, killed American troops on the ground, and Trump has basically killed one general, but other than that is left alone. North Korea can't do anything about it. So somebody says, what about North Korea? Well, North Korea can't do anything about this. They're too weak, but these countries can do something about it. These countries are engaged in operations to undermine American interests all in various parts of the world. North Korea is just static. They have nothing. Iran is engaged with American troops in the Middle East. Iran is significantly increasing its influence in Afghanistan. Iran is significantly increasing its influence in Iraq, in Syria. And it is teamed up.
I didn't get that.
There's Siri again, thinking I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to you, Siri. Iran is teaming up now with a once enemy, which is Turkey, to divvy up Syria and even parts of Iraq. As you know, Trump cut a deal and allowed Turkey to take a chunk of Syria, the Kurdish chunk. Iran is being emboldened by the weakness that America is projecting in Afghanistan and now in our own country. And Iran is mocking the U.S. I mean, these countries were already mocking the U.S. for our response to coronavirus and how we crippled our own country, crippled our own economy, almost destroyed our own economy in our pathetic, impotent attempt to stop coronavirus from killing Americans. And now they've got these riots, and they're just, all of their TV networks are just celebrating this. And on the ground, they're taking advantage of it. Trump's eye is not on these issues, not that it's particularly good to begin with. His foreign policy has embraced Turkey. But Turkey, a member of NATO, has no agenda consistent with the United States. It is an authoritarian country led by an Islamist. All of you who think Islam is the biggest threat in the world, then you should be anti-Trump because Trump has done nothing to quell the threat of Islam in the world. He has helped Turkey, helped Saudi Arabia. Turkey, run by an Islamist, is cooperating with Iranians. Turkey, a member of NATO, has bought some of the most advanced weapon systems from the Russians, particularly the S-400, which is an anti-airplane missile system that it's not clear that the Americans have an answer for, and yet that is Turkey that has deployed these. And Turkey will further its influence in the Middle East, further its Islamist agenda all over the Middle East. Iran, the people who are cowering now are the people who pretend to be our allies, like the Saudis, and because they see how weak America is. Russia, Putin is loving this. Putin loves the idea of American weakness, and he has, of course, flexed his muscles in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in Syria, all over the place. And now, by the way, in Afghanistan, you will see that as America withdraws from Afghanistan, with losing, tail between its legs. And I'm for that withdrawal because I don't see any other option. Any other option that an American president could actually execute on. Nobody has the balls to do it. But Russia's influence in Afghanistan, Iran's influence in Afghanistan are going to grow dramatically. And then finally China, which is not only engaged right now in a border dispute with India, two countries with nuclear weapons, and there's been fighting across that border, but is, of course, going around the world telling everybody, you want to be affiliated with this loser country, the United States of America? We are the stable country. We are the country that is engaged. We are the law and order country. Be our friend. So These countries are celebrating our demise, and their influence is only going to grow in the world as the United States is in significant, massive decline. All right, let's go back to some of your questions. Let's see if there's any other questions on this. Do you view the mainstream endorsements of BLM as meaningful or superficial virtue signaling? It doesn't matter. Because even if they're virtue signaling, it means that that is what virtue constitutes. And these companies have a lot of influence on people. They have a lot of influence on consumers. They have a lot of influence on it. What they have done is they have mainstreamed BLM. They have mainstreamed. They've taken Black Lives Matter, which was a fringe organization, which after the demonstrations of 2016 was put to the fringe because some of their bigger agenda was revealed. And now what's happened is they've been mainstreamed. They could be completely embraced by mainstream companies, which means they'll get more contributions, more money, more support across the board. And that is tragic for America's future. Oh my God. I'm never going to get to all these super chat questions, guys, unless we do our first 3-hour show today. I don't know what you're thinking. Stop asking. Let's see. What's the other BLM? Coming in late, so maybe you said this, but BLM message is a lie. No statistical evidence that killing per arrest are race-based. I'm not convinced of that. I've seen plenty of statistics, put aside the killing, plenty of statistics of police discrimination against minorities. Really, the statistics are overwhelming. And the simplest one is traffic stops. I mentioned this earlier. The simple thing is, you know, somebody like Michael Jordan having to tell his kids, you know, if the police stop you, this is how you should behave. You should assume that they're going to be rough on you. They're going to be, you know, no white parent has that talk with their kids. And it's not a stupid talk. It's a talk that you know, Michael Jordan, right? Somebody in that prominence has to have with his kids, and blacks have to have with their kids. There's no question in my mind that there is statistical evidence, and put aside the killings, but of discrimination across the board. Now, it could be that in particular of killings it doesn't exist, but even there, I mean, I'd encourage you to look at the Cato Institute, not exactly a leftist group, and their statistics on these things. I know that I forget her name, from the Manhattan Institute, contradicts all this, but, you know, this is a factual issue, and it doesn't matter whether it's statistically significant. The fact is that there's plenty of evidence that some blacks have been killed for no reason. Now, it's also true that some whites are killed for no reason. And I talked about that. I talked about the fact that what we need is an anti-police brutality movement. I've seen video of police killing people randomly. I mean, not randomly, but killing people for no reasonable reason. I mean, you saw the guy who was shot 16 times in Chicago. Some of those times in the back. All he had was a knife in his hand. He was far away from the police when he was shot. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Come on. I mean, the video is clear. So there are real problems with policing. And we need to address those problems. And some of it might be related to race. There's no question that some policemen are racist. So whether the statistics bear it out or not, one has to address the actual problems that exist. Whether they are dominant or whether they are small is an empirical question. And there's statistics on both sides of that argument. If you are against Trump sending it to... Oh, I answered that one already. Why are European countries like the UK or Canada less racist than America, even though they are less individualistic? Well, it's not obvious that they're less racist. Europe is very racist. I mean, if you go to, I've seen this, you know, documentaries about football, about soccer, and when blacks first started playing soccer in places like France, they were called the worst kind of names possible. It was disgusting. So there was a lot of racism in Europe and what the Europeans did in Africa and the way they behaved towards blacks in Africa was just horrific. The fundamental difference is that Europeans did not have blacks as slaves in Europe, at least not many and not for a prolonged period of time. They participated in the slave trade, so their colonies had slaves. They had slaves in their colonies offshore. So the racism and the slavery were away from the heart, from the center. Right? And I think that shielded, if you will, thanks, Michael, that is very generous. I will get to your comment. They shielded the European countries from that conflict, from the tension, from the challenge of slavery. So when Britain eliminated slavery, it was primarily in its colonies that it was eliminating slavery. Not, there were, as far as I know, I don't know that there were slaves in England. If there were very few. But European countries are very racist. They're racist against Jews, right? So think about anti-Semitism. Europe is very anti-Semitic, has been historically, and to some extent still is. And then they hate each other, right? They hate each other based on their tribes. And they just don't have that big of a minority population within Europe. But no, and part of it is post-World War II that they feel guilty for the anti-Semitism. So they try to, again, they hide the racism. They try not to be overtly racist because they know their own history and they know what that led to. But it's still there. Now, I don't know about Canada. I don't know enough about Canada. But I think it has to do, some of it has to do with that European culture that was raised. I think Canada is much more individualistic than Europe is. It is being influenced by America in that sense. I think Europe, though, it's just the right context and the right time. And of course, the UK is quite individualistic, much more individualistic than Europe itself. I think it's really the consequence of World War II. It's a consequence of them facing the evil that racism led them. But think about what happened in Yugoslavia, the breakup of Yugoslavia, the Balkans, and the Croats hating the Serbs, who hate the Serbians, who hate the Montenegrins, who hate that, I don't know that that's racism, but it's a form of tribalism. It's another form of racism. I think UK is less racist because UK has become such a cosmopolitan country, and it's lived with cosmopolitanism for such a long time, and it's been an individualist country. Remember, this is the land of the Enlightenment. But if you see Central Europe, if you see Poland, if you see Southern Europe, the Balkans, there's a lot of tribalism that one could view as racism. BET founder was talking about reparations for slavery by bringing up Israel. Can you explain how they are different? So the main difference is that the generation that actually had slaves is not around anymore. That the generation that actually committed the injustice is long gone. Germany paid reparations. The generation that actually committed the horrors paid the reparations. And they paid the reparations to the victims of those horrors. I don't believe future generations of Germans should continue paying reparations to future generations of Jews. I think that has to end. And I don't know how the reparations in Israel are structured, or for Jews are structured, but generally my understanding is that Germany paid reparations to Holocaust survivors. Imagine a court in which these survivors sued Germany, sued the people who victimized them. and extracted civil reparations from them. That is the equivalent of what Germany has done. It's that generation, immediate generation, paying for its sins, not future generations paying for sins they didn't commit. I am not guilty of what my grandfather did, or my great-grandfather did, or my great-great-great-grandfather did. I am me. If I commit a sin, I should pay for it. So there's a vast difference, and the difference is time. I mean, what, Jews are gonna demand reparations from the Egyptians for slavery? I mean, it never ends if you do that. At some point, you have to say it's over, it's done. I think post-Civil War, the tragedy is not that blacks were not paid reparations. The tragedy is Jim Crow laws. The tragedy is what happened is the institutionalization of racism into the South's laws at a period when there was an opportunity to actually change the culture in fundamental ways. And that opportunity was blown. That opportunity disappeared. And that's the great tragedy, not the issue of reparations. But you could have understood reparations being paid, for example, by the South, or maybe by the United States, to former slaves. That would be reparations that I think are reasonable. But not, there's a bunch of immigrants in the United States today who were not involved in racism, were not involved in slavery. Why should they pay reparations? So it's not comparable. Let's see if there's anything more on this issue. How do we change the framing of any political discussion from collectivism to individualism? I see so much collectivism on the right and on the left. Much of it is racist. I agree. The way to change the framing is not to buy into the collectivism, not to buy into they versus us, not to buy into black versus white, not to buy into proletarian versus the bourgeois in a Marxist sense, not to buy into classism, racism, any kind of group identity, but to talk about the impact of policies, the impact of events on individuals, and focus on individuals. And emphasize the need to focus on individuals. That's all that should matter. So the way to fight it is not to buy into it. I see so many people who claim to be individualists speaking the language of collectivism. And you see it even in economics, where everything is aggregated, where everything is just the economy. No, it's individual lives. It's not about opening the economy. It's about allowing individuals to exercise their supposedly constitutional protected rights. It's about rights, individual rights. Why are protests being allowed and praised by politicians, media, when we are all supposed to be locked down? Protesters are immune to the threat of coronavirus, while those that have protesters' lockdowns are denounced. Well, yeah, I mean, that is part of the big, contradiction that is. We shouldn't be locked down. If you protested being locked down, you were denounced. Now, part of that was the fact that the protesters didn't respect the science. These people are not respecting the science, and they should be, if we're going to condemn people for not respecting the science, then they should be condemned as well. I think the idea is that this is a higher cause, and therefore we're supposed to put this aside, that the lockdowns don't matter, coronavirus doesn't matter. But when people die, if people die, now I think because this is outdoors, the likelihood of mass infection is low. But if people start dying from this, what are people going to think at that point? What are people going to think at that point? What is the perceived higher good at that point when people's lives are being given up? Politicians have snitching hotline phone numbers for businesses who reopen under lockdown, but no such hotlines for vandals and looters. The left in power clearly wants this. What about the right in power? There are plenty of governors who are Republican. The federal governor is Republican. The Senate is Republican. You know, why doesn't Ohio institute hotlines for vandals and looters? Why is this left and right? I mean, they're all incompetent fools. They're all anti-business owners. They all locked us down. It's not about the left and the right. They all are willing to tolerate vandals and looters, but not willing to tolerate somebody who cuts hair. That was in Texas, by the way, the woman who got sentenced to 7 days in jail. That was in Texas. Now, she was freed, but it was in Texas. Not exactly a bastion of the left. The other day, you said you were convinced Dr. Peikoff to push his dim hypothesis prediction further into the future. Yeah, I mean, Dr. Peikoff mentions that at the end of the book. He actually credits or debits, I'm not sure, me and John Allison for convincing him to end the book on a more positive note. What was Dr. Peikoff's actual timeline prediction for America? I don't know. And it doesn't really matter because any timeline prediction is, you know, I won't say arbitrary, but it's almost impossible to make. You know, he made it for 50 years with some hope of change if objectivism can have greater influence on the culture, which is what we're trying to have. So, you know, if I couldn't convince him that objectivism had the opportunity to have, it could slow things down, then maybe it's 20, 25, 30 years. And I'm more today inclined towards 20 to 30 years than 50, given what's happening right now, given Trump, given the response to these riots, given the state of the country, state of the intellectuals, left and right, particularly on the right, because the right's the alternative to the left. So the left we know, we've written off. This is why, you know, people say, why do you attack the right all the time? Because the left, it's easy. Everybody knows I'm against the left. Everybody knows the arguments against the left. Everybody knows Ayn Rand's arguments against the left. Everybody knows what we said about the left. But you think the right is an alternative. And then when you turn to the right and see them as bad as the left, then you say, whoa, I need a comment on that. Because A, people think I'm of the right. And B, people think that I think the right is an alternative to the left. Well, it's not. And I need to point that out because maybe then a third alternative will emerge. And it doesn't have to be an objectivist alternative. It just has to be an American alternative, a pro-American, based on reason and individualism alternative to both left and right. So my job is to attack the right. There are plenty of people attacking the left. And I do attack the left. I just spent an hour and a half mostly attacking the left. Is Trump not racist because there's no evidence of him saying he hates blacks, Latinos? Do you have to actually say it to be considered a racist? Is attitude also important? Does he embrace racism? I mean, I think Trump is an emotional, kind of spontaneous non-thinker, right? And I think that, yeah, I think there are moments where he's sympathetic to the racists. And in that sense, I think there's definitely an element of racism to Donald Trump. I mean, all you had to see is the response in Charlottesville. Oh, they're good people on both sides. Really? Really? There were no good people marching, chanting, Jews will not replace us. No good people march. And and I've said this before, if you're in the vicinity of people who march saying that, then you should walk away. You shouldn't stay there and join them in a demonstration. It's why I don't think people should join Black Lives Matter in demonstration. They're not good people. I've listened to the whole quote. I've listened to it many times. I've written it, I've outlined it. I've listened to it in great detail. And what he says is wrong. What he says is bigoted. What he says is supportive of white supremacists. What he says is supportive of the racists marching there. Because there are no good people. The people celebrate, the good people are the people who want to demonstrate against knocking down a statue of a racist. The good people are there who are just hanging out with a bunch of Nazis. Those are good people. Give me a break. No, Trump, whether he does it because he knows that some of his base supports these people, so he feels like he has to, whether he does it because it's truly him, whether he does it because he just doesn't think, hard to tell. But he certainly has he has made things easier for racists, made it harder for those fighting racism in this country. All right, let's see. Thank you. Okay, thank you for the show. Would you consider bringing Mr. Thompson, Dr. Thompson and Dr. Bernstein to further explicate the issues of education? I believe it is central to explaining the deteriorating conditions as you've touched on here. Yes, I mean, we'll definitely do more on education, whether it'll be the two of them or others, but we'll do a lot more on education. I'm definitely going to have Brad Thompson on soon, because Brad has just written a very important article about the evils of the right, the new right, the new elements within the right, which I agree with. I agree with most of the article, and I want him to come on. And then they responded, and their response was despicable. The way they responded to what Brad wrote. So I want to bring him on to talk about his essay and the response of the conservatives to his essay, which I think would be incredibly, interesting and meaningful and important. Because I think the battle against the right is crucial. And Brad, in the last few weeks, has been at the forefront of the battle against the right. Yeah, I mean, Dr. Gamong on the super chat says, on the chat says, to call Trump a racist or non-racist is somewhat beside the point. The point is he hasn't got any consistent views, only knee-jerk and collectivistic hatred. Yeah, I think that's right. He sometimes exhibits racist views, and he sometimes doesn't, and he sometimes says the right thing, and often he says the wrong thing. He's a non-entity intellectually. He has no consistent views. He is completely knee-jerk, depending on the moment, depending on what he thinks is too strong of a word, he thinks will get him the right kind of attention. He's a narcissist who is looking for a particular type of attention, and part of that is votes. Right? All right, let me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we got 8 questions. Let me go quickly through them, and I'll start at the top. Hey, Yaron, I was talking with a leftist friend about income mobility. He says we need revolution, etc. I told him the U.S. has lots of mobility, but we need more capitalism. Could you speak to this? Yeah, I mean, we have lots of mobilities, but we don't have enough. So I agree with him that income mobility is hurt, and it's in decline. It's been in decline for the last 100 years, and it's a consequence of the attempts to provide more mobility. That's a consequence of socialism. It's a consequence of statism. It's a consequence of government intervention. The slower mobility. Economic mobility is essential because it is a feature of freedom. It's not something you strive. It's a consequence of freedom. So what we need is more capitalism, and more capitalism will lead to more mobility. So mobility in America today is a problem. We have to acknowledge that. And the solution is capitalism. I mentioned a few things earlier, getting rid of minimum wages, getting rid of licensing laws, getting rid of the welfare state, getting rid of regulation of business. They can hire more people. All of those things will increase mobility. You have said that you disagree with Rand's view of the civil rights movement. Why was she wrong? I don't think I said quite that I disagree with Rand's view of the civil rights movement. I think that looking back, there was so much going on in the 1960s around the civil rights movement. I would have liked to have seen her address the issue more extensively and stake out in an anti, she did, but I think I would have liked to have seen more of her staking out a stance against the southern states, against Jim Crow laws. Again, she did that, and her essay on racism is the best essay on racism ever, and it's right on point. But the civil rights movement was a really interesting phenomena during that period, and I think she could have said more about it, and I think it would have been interesting, and I think if she'd focused more on it, I doubt I would disagree with her about it. Is it better to let 1,000 guilty men go free than to put one innocent man in jail? I mean, it's not a real choice. It's a kind of there's no real good answer to that, right? You don't want to do either one of them. You don't want to do either one of them. But yes, you never want to violate somebody's rights. And it depends on the guilty person. How guilty are they? Are they murderers? Are they pickpockets? Are they drug users? So I think one of the reasons Ayn Rand was against the death penalty was the idea that you would rather not, even though she thought the death penalty was just in a sense that they deserved it, but the risk of having one person be killed, one innocent person be killed, was not worth it, even if it meant that 1,000 people didn't go free, but they didn't die when they deserved to die. All right, let me see. Do you think Leonard Peikoff's talk about O.J. trial is relevant to what's going on today? Yes, very much so, because Peikoff's talk on the O.J. Simpson trial, and you can find it online, I think the Ayn Rand Institute has put it online, is a brilliant analysis of the epistemology of the rejection of objectivity, the rejection of facts and reality and evidence. And I think that lack of objectivity is all around us. It's part of, it's the source of much of our problems. It's subjectivism, emotionalism. It goes back to what I said before about reason. It's about, if you reject reason, what are you left with? Well, if you reject reason, they rejected reason in the O.J. trial. Now, Peikoff's O.J. lecture is amazing and lots of different elements. So yes, I think it's relevant to the whole cultural debate that we're having on every issue out there, because it goes to the heart of the problem, which is the rejection of objectivity, of facts, of reality, of science, and why they reject it. So I should listen to it again, and you should, if you have never heard it, you should try find it. Put Leonard Peikoff O.J. trial and see. You should be able to find a recording. Vonda, thank you. That, again, very, very generous. What effect does the media and leftist propaganda play in portraying a non-factually based perception of racial bias? Well, again, what is factually based? I mean, the media exaggerates, but again, you get the left media exaggerating the degree of racial bias, and you get the right-based media, whitewashing racial bias. That's the media today. And what is lacking is objectivity. What is lacking is real empirical evidence. What is lacking is real facts. And there were some attempts, and I don't know where they've gone after the shooting cases in the 2015-16 period, of actually getting statistics and doing analysis and actually getting the facts and trying to figure out what really is going on. And some of that was done by the mainstream media, by people like the Washington Post. I don't know where that is and where that's gone. But yes, there is bias in the media, but the bias is on all sides. There is racial discrimination out there. Is it as bad as CNN and MSNBC wants you to think it is? Probably not. Is it as little as Fox wants you to believe it is? I'm convinced it's not. So it's somewhere in between those, and what we need is objectivity. What we need is people approaching this on the basis of facts and evidence. Why hasn't police brutality affected Asians? I don't know. I mean, if you go back in history and you look at the attitude towards the Chinese in San Francisco, there was unbelievable police brutality against the Chinese in the early part of the century. And indeed, the first non-blacks who were really legally discriminated against were Asians, were Chinese. The first people banned from immigrating into this country were the Chinese. So there has been police brutality against Asians. I think Asian culture today, I don't know, but my guess is there are fewer criminals. I think there are among Asians, so they interact with the police probably less. And there's just not the same level of animosity and hostility. There's not as much history. There's not as much institutionalized racism. I think California, which was very racist against Chinese, has gotten over it and moved on. So I think those are some of the causes. But remember, racism against blacks in this country goes back to slavery, goes back to Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws were not that long ago. They were in the 60s when it was illegal to marry a person for a black to marry a white, if a white to marry a black. I mean, whoa, in a civilized society, the government gets to tell me who I can marry and who I can't. It's just, it truly is unbelievable that was the situation in this country at that time. TPP. All right. Hi, Yaron. If you had the power, would you privatize the police in the United States? No, never. I do not believe in private police forces. I do not believe in anarchy. I think that would cause more violence, not less, as the different groups had their own police forces paid for and fighting each other. It wouldn't be looting. It would be all-out civil war, all-out, disaster. So no, I'm very, very much against private police forces, private judiciaries, private governments, private militaries. Policing is a state business. You might like Cave in the Light by Arthur Herman. I love that book. I highly recommend it. Cave in the Light by Arthur Herman. It's about how the philosophies of Aristotle and Plato play themselves out over the history of the West. How Aristotle is the consequence of all good comes from Aristotle. The consequence of all bad comes from Plato. It's excellent. And the New Discourses, a website by James Lindsay, a glossary of social justice, critical theory, jargon. I'll look for that. Is it still a good idea for a European to move to the U.S.? What will happen in Europe if U.S. becomes fascist in the way Dim predicts? And will it still be better in the U.S. than Europe if that happens? It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. And is Europe all the same? I think the world goes to hell if America goes to hell, but it's not guaranteed because knowledge of liberty, the ideas of liberty are now all over the world. Scientific knowledge, knowledge about individual rights, about science, about reason is global. It's not just in the West, it's not just in Europe, but just in the U.S., or just in the U.S. and Europe. It's in Asia, it's in Australia, it's everywhere. And it truly is global. So it's possible that some part of the world could survive and become better and do better once if the United States collapses. But it's hard to believe at this point in time, maybe some small countries around the world, although why would those small countries survive when the United States is gone? What would stop the Russians from invading most of Eastern Europe or places like Georgia and places like that and reestablishing a Soviet Union style? What would happen in mainland Europe? I mean, yes, some countries could survive relatively free like Switzerland. So it's really hard to tell. I don't know. Generally, Europe, in some ways, Europe is worse than the U.S., and in some ways, the U.S. is worse. And I think that Europe has a knee-jerk reaction against nationalism and certainly fascism and racism because of World War II. It's still in the kind of the culture. We're against those things. We don't know exactly even why, but they were bad in World War II, so we're against them. America doesn't have that to the same degree. It used to have it in the name of individualism, but that is dissipating. So it might be that it happens first here, but I'm not sure of that, and I'm certainly not convinced of that. It could very well happen first in Europe, and then the United States. It could happen in the same place, both places, similar time frame. I don't know enough about European culture. Somebody else asked Trump or Biden. Luckily, I don't have to make that choice. I'm a resident of Puerto Rico. As a resident of Puerto Rico, I'm not allowed to vote in the election. But let me just say that I would vote for almost anybody over Trump. And that probably includes Biden at this point. Now, partially it'll depend on who Biden chooses as his vice president, because Biden is so old, and Biden is a fool, and Biden is a disaster, and Biden is awful, horrible, horrific. But I think the long-term damage that Donald Trump does to this country overrides most of the bad things about the alternatives. Again, depends on who the alternative is exactly. And again, I won't be voting. I won't be voting. Yeah, I mean, it's a sad day today for America. It really is. Because of what's happening in the streets and because American greatness is disappearing before our eyes. It will be under the banner of Make America Great Again that America will seemingly cease to be great, or the tipping point might happen where it is now, the tipping point might happen where saving this country becomes impossible. I don't know. I hope that's not true. But it certainly is the case that America, in the name of America being great again, in the name of people hating America being great again, in the name of both left and right, America is in decline. And the barbarians within America and the barbarians overseas are celebrating that fact. Celebrating that fact. And that's sad. It's sad to be an American. It's sad to be an American right now. It's sad to be an intellectual right now because it's not clear who's listening. I mean, you guys are, but I don't know beyond you guys how many people are listening. And it's hard to assess how much hope there really is. Okay, thanks everybody. I appreciate you listening to my rants. It's been almost 2 hours. This might be, one of the longest shows I've done. This is, hopefully we don't do many of these. It's a little too long, I know for most of you, and many will complain. Hopefully there's enough material here to split up into lots of shorter videos that we can take and publish. Please share, like, subscribe, and support the show. Get your friends to subscribe to the show, promote the show on social media. I'm trying to get at 20,000 subscriptions as quickly as possible. We're almost at 19,000. I hope to make 19,000. Subscriptions have been up a lot in the last few days. So I'm really hoping to get at 20,000 and then on to 100 and more. So please subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe. Share the show. Like the show. Get our algorithm up. And, of course, financially support the show. You can do that on subscribestar.com. You can do it on Patreon. You can do it on yaronbrookshow.com/support, and you can do it on Dave Rubin's new platform, Locals, where I have a channel. Thank you, all of you who support the show. Thank you, all of you who did the Super Chat and contributed to the show through Super Chat. Thank you for making these evenings enjoyable in spite of my anger. Enjoyable and giving me an outlet for my anger and my ideas. Bye, everybody. Talk to you maybe tomorrow. Maybe I'll have more to say tomorrow. Bye.